Hey everybody, I'm sitting here in traffic and I was just trying to think of stuff to do that I can accomplish while I'm sitting in traffic, and so I figured what better way than to explain some of the inefficiencies that we deal with in ministry. And when I say inefficiencies, I mean, sometimes people ask, well, what do you guys do in a regular day? And as one of our missionary friends said recently, all I do is stand in lines all day. And so that might seem a little, how do you say, a little anticlimactic, but sometimes it's true. And so I wanted to explain to you guys something that we recently went through. And by we, I mean myself, a pastor here in Guatemala, and another missionary, and another Guatemalan that works in a ministry with us that has the signature authority for the ministry. And Missy went through a little bit of it in the fact that she had to deal with my frustrations in trying to get it all done. So I'll try to make this not too long, not as long as this line of traffic is. But so some people saw a need for a pastor that works in the mountains of Guatemala and then the Baja region. Some of you may have heard of it. And so they got some money together and they sent it down to Guatemala so that they could buy a truck for this pastor. Now it has to come down legitimately, so servants offered to help with the transfer of money. And what that meant is that the money gets sent and donated to servants, sent down to servants in Guatemala. Then we go buy the truck, and then we give it to the pastor, which seems easy. So we got the money, and I let them know that we had the money. Now, Nevada is about a 7 to 8 hour drive, maybe even longer, depending on the method of transportation. So the pastor came by bus so that he could drive the truck. He came to the city overnight so he could be here in the morning. And they were looking around for trucks, and he was going all over the place in the city. And that took about 3/4 of a day. And then he started expanding outside the city because he couldn't find a good quality truck for what he needed. It's a very mountainous region with no paved roads, so it's just a lot of, you need 4-wheel drive and off-road. So anyway, he finally found one 2 hours away from the city, or 2 hours away from where we're at. And you have to do legal paperwork, and transferring the money part was somewhat easy. I say somewhat. The problem is that the person who holds the power of attorney for the organization has to sign the paperwork to receive the truck. So we go to the bank and we deposit a check in his account, and he lets the pastor drive off with the truck, and then we'll take care of the paperwork later. Fine, good. He's got his truck. He's driving that 8-hour drive back to Neighbor. The next day we get a message to find out the check didn't go through, because when you sign a check of higher value than normal, they try to call you to verify that you wrote the check, even though it requires 2 signatures. Well, the phone call didn't make it through or didn't get answered, and so the check was rejected. So now this guy who just sold a truck just got shafted out of the pavement, and the truck is 8 hours away. You can imagine how he felt. So I got to run around to the bank and figure out, well, how am I going to be able to send him this money? And they said, well, you can write another check, but the same thing's going to happen. I was like, well, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, how about like a cashier's check, which would cost a little bit of money, but at least it would be easier. And he's like, oh, well, that is only if it's with the same bank that we bank with. And since the owner or the previous owner of the truck has a different bank account, or a bank account in a different bank, it wouldn't work. So the cashier's check was out. But they say you can do it online. Well, I tried to do it online. It doesn't work online. Then they finally guided me and they showed me where I can do it online, but I had to set up this whole profile in order to do so. And then once I go to send the money, it takes 24 to 48 hours to actually go through. Meanwhile, the previous owner of the truck is calling me and threatening to get the police involved because we essentially robbed him of the truck. Now, I understood this because I would feel the same exact way. That being said, we got the money sorted out, but now we have to get the paperwork taken care of to where it's in the pastor's name, because in Guatemala, if you are driving around a vehicle registered in somebody else's name without authorization, you lose the vehicle and you get thrown in jail for robbing a car. Well, we don't want that to happen. So the pastor had to drive all the way back from Neba and go to our lawyer's office, and our legal representative, who works during the day, had to try and get out there in the afternoon, which is at least an hour drive one way because of traffic, and if anything gets delayed, then they get stuck in rush hour traffic, which means they won't be home for another like 3 or 4 hours. So we have to time this out. Now, not only all of that is involved, but then we come to find out that the previous owner of the truck also has to be there, and we're asking him to drive 2 or 3 hours so that everybody can get together and everybody sign this paperwork that was already signed, mind you, and authorized by another lawyer, but they didn't do it properly. So now we have the paperwork signed that that the owner received the money, and he received the money from the ministry for this pickup truck that is for another person. Everybody signed the paperwork. Good. Now, a week later, the pastor has to drive back from Neba another 8 hours, and the legal representative also has to go in to sign the paperwork over. Notice that this has to take place like a week later. It doesn't all just happen at once. And then once that happens, then the pastor gets the paperwork, and he is able to then take the title that is in our name and the association's name, that is in the ministry's name, and he has to take that to the governing authority, which will then give him a new title in his name, and he can get the plates, and that it's registered in his name. That part has yet to happen, and we've been doing this since August. We are now approaching the middle of October. So you can see when people say, what is a normal day? It involves all of this stuff. Now, one interesting note to put on top of all that is we have done this once before for another pastor to get him a motorcycle so he could travel from village to village because there's not much transportation in the mountains, public transportation that is, and he is a district supervisor over a bunch of churches, and each village is like miles away up and over different hills. So it makes sense that the man would have a motorcycle. So we did that, and there's a little bit of delay in the paperwork to transfer it over into his name because you have to pay taxes when you do that, and he didn't have the money for it, so he wants to wait until next year. Okay, that's fine. And we just did that letter of authorization for him to drive the motorcycle until that happens, and somebody stole the license plate off of his motorcycle. So the vehicle's not in his name. It is in the mountains, and at least he's got the letter of authorization, and so at the beginning of next year we will be hopefully transferring it over into his name, and so he can get his new plates. We also discovered that when he claims or goes back in for his new plates, he has to take it to one of 2 locations in Guatemala to have his vehicle inspected thoroughly. That means they have to take the motorcycle apart and match all of the serial numbers that are on the chassis and all the other parts, and make sure that this is a vehicle that didn't get stolen by him, and then they will authorize him to apply for new plates. And so we've heard that this place that you go to, you have to be there at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and wait in line, since there's only 2 places in the entire country. And with as much theft as there is here, you can imagine how many plates get stolen per day. And so he's going to have to take it there and let them inspect his motorcycle and make sure that it's the motorcycle he says it is before he can even get license plates put on it. Now in the States, I never had my license plate stolen, thankfully, so I don't know how involved that process is, but I can already imagine it is not as detailed and complicated as that is. So that is a story of the craziness of the processes and the paperwork that is involved in the country of Guatemala. The reason that all this is put in place, it would be easy to say that, oh, well, this is just because, they're a society that's, behind ours, or they're a developing country or whatever. But the reason that all of this paperwork is so difficult is because of the extreme corruption. So the legalization of things and the registration of things in Guatemala is extremely critical and extremely painstaking, because all these things are put in place to prevent robbery and extortion and money laundering and all of that. And so it's not necessarily a product of the country itself or even the way the government works. It is more a product of trying to prevent the more major crimes in this country. So if you can go into a bank and get your tags and title right away, or when you purchase a car and they say, oh, here you go, and 20 minutes later you walk out with your car and everything's taken care of, be very, very thankful, because it's not like that in other parts of the world, and especially not in Guatemala. So I know this has gone on a little bit, but I wanted you guys to get a glimpse of what things are like, and traffic is now moving, so I have to pay more attention to the road. But thanks for following along, and next time that we put out a prayer request about something we got to do in the bank or registering something or a vehicle, now maybe you can direct those prayers a little bit more specifically, because you'll know about what we will be dealing with. So thanks. Have a great day.